So listen, Alex, would you like to go to the student bar? So when you're asking me if I would like to go to the student bar, are you asking me if I would like to go to the student bar on my own or with you? Alex, I'm asking you if you'd like to go to the student bar with me. Do you want to go to the student bar with me? So when you're asking me if I want to go to the student bar with you, are you asking me if I want to we just go to the bar and hang out, or are we going to have a drink? A drink. Do you want to come with me and have a drink at the student bar? So when you say a drink, do you literally mean that we're going to have a drink, or we're going to have like a number of drinks? I'm asking you to come out with me to the student bar for the rest of the evening and drink. If that's the case, then I'd have to go to the cash point. So and that's on the way home. So I'd better go home, and then if I go home, well, I've got this food in the fridge, and well, it's going to go off today. Today's the last day, so I'd better get that eaten and have that for dinner, and then I'll come back. So I suppose it'll take me about 20 minutes to get home, and then about probably 20 minutes to cook and eat the dinner, and then another. And so I could see you here in the 20 minutes, and then I suppose I could see you here in an hour or so. But Alex, do you want to come now? Oh, I couldn't come now. I mean, are you going to offer to pay for me, or what? Hello, and welcome to this edition of the Jolly Heretic. Now, today I would like to talk about the issue of autism, and specifically high-functioning autism, the kind of autism that my friend there, Alex Drea, with whom I was at university, suffered from. Now, Alex was, and perhaps which all of those that are involved in and watching this channel may have to some extent. Alex was a very fascinating guy and a very intelligent guy. He would always be the person in philosophy seminars or whatever who would ask the most insightful questions, most intelligent questions, who would really, really get people thinking. But he was incredibly honest, he was incredibly naive, he was incredibly socially clumsy, he was incredibly fearless. And as a consequence of this, unfortunately, he met a very sticky end, which some of you may know about, and which I will tell you about later. Now, I was got thinking about this by a very interesting book, which I was given by a person who is a high-functioning autistic, and it's called An Autistic Guy's Guide to Security, Among Other Thoughts, by TLCR. The gentleman in question is a high-functioning autistic who wishes to remain anonymous. And what it looks at really is the simple fact that people who are autistic or high-functioning autistics are more likely to be victims of crime. They are at increased risk of being robbed. They are at increased risk of being murdered even. They are at increased risk of false accusations being made against them. They are at increased risk of being treated unfairly by the criminal justice system and by the courts, because let's face it, the courts are aimed at and built around normies. They're built around non-autistics. And so behaviour which would seem suspicious if you were a normie would not seem suspicious if you were an autistic, and so because you are so honest that it wouldn't occur to you that it was suspicious, and so consequently people who are autistic will find themselves unfairly perhaps found guilty of crimes. They will find themselves unfairly in prison. They will if someone tells them, could you at an airport perhaps, could you carry this bag for me, would you mind awfully, my bag's overweight, and give it to me on the other side, they won't even question whether there's drugs in the bag they're being asked to carry. They'll just carry it, and so consequently they'll get themselves into trouble. And the book looks at this. It looks at the fact that people who have Asperger's find social situations very, very difficult. They don't know what to say, they don't know what to do, they can't read the social signals of the situation, and this makes them very, very trusting often. They will lack an instinct for timing and the right thing to say at the right time, and they will simply be too honest and too trusting. Often, the book points out, they will have been bullied at various points in their lives because of their lack of social skill. This being bullied will mean that they will have, in some respects, kind of low self-esteem. And the interesting point it makes is this will be reflected in their body language, and they will be sort of down like this, and this will make them be more likely to be targeted by robbers. They will look like a weak target, and therefore they will be more likely to be the victims of street robbery, because they will look like a weak target. They will look like a weak person. They will have this body language of being weak. They will be in a world of their own a lot of the time, because they will be so fascinated by ideas and by structure, as we'll look at in a minute, and by the nature of the world, and consequently they will be oblivious to what's going on, and so they won't be concentrating when they are in a situation where they should be concentrating, such as a situation where there are lots of people in a rather dodgy area or something like that, and therefore they will be more likely to be pickpocketed. The person in the book gives an example of how he was in a cafe and he was absorbed in his own world, thinking about something or whatever, thinking about how to structure the nature of life or whatever it was, or some cognitive problem, and then he looked up and he was absorbed in his own thoughts for 10 minutes or so, and then he realised his wallet had been stolen. Now, this is not something that would happen to a person who was a normie, a non-autistic, because such a person would be more aware of their surroundings and would be more aware of the need to concentrate. The book gives all kinds of examples of situations that you will be in as a person who is autistic, and how to potentially deal with them. And for people who are normies, these things will be perfectly obvious, such as if you have some kind of problem, it's often better to, such as that you've been accused of something, it's often better to contact a lawyer first rather than the police first, because that often, as a person who is autistic, your instincts with regard to what to do in terms of dealing with the police, in terms of dealing with other people, will be wrong. They will be incorrect, and they will get you into further trouble because your instincts will be naive, and therefore you will do things that will make you look suspicious in the view of the police, or will make you look guilty in the view of the police. Your instincts will be wrong. He gives an example of suddenly running. Well, suddenly running away from a problematic situation. Well, for a person that's autistic, it might seem logical. There's a problematic situation, so you need to run away. But if the police are around, then suddenly running away might look suspicious. And basically the book sets out and gives many sort of case studies of situations in which a person who is autistic might get themselves into trouble, and what they should do in those situations, how they should avoid false arrest, awareness of the fact that authorities, including the police, are often corrupt, and often don't do what they say they do. And this is very, very difficult for autistic people to understand, that people often don't do what they say they do. Because, well, what is the nature of being autistic? Let's look at this in more detail. The nature of being autistic is that you are socially blind. Now, Simon Baron-Cohen looks at a spectrum in which he has the archetypal female brain at one end. This is the brain, he argues, that is very high in empathy, but very, very low in systematizing. It is basically system blind. And the archetypal autistic, the male brain at the other end, this is very, very high in systematizing, but is empathy blind. Now, systematizing, of course, is the ability and desire to make sense of the world, to structure the world, to understand the world. And now you could argue that empathy, that feelings, that sort of caring about other people and their feelings, gets in the way of that, because sometimes structuring the world and getting to the truth about the world will offend people and will offend against people's feelings. And so consequences such as if you find that there are racial differences, for example, or whatever like that, it will offend against people's feelings. And so consequently, a person who is very good at structuring the world will not care about people's feelings, and this will make them good at structuring and systematizing in the world. This trait, he calls it the extreme male brain, is associated with masculine traits. People that are high in this trait tend to be physically more masculine. They are more masculinized. They display markers of higher testosterone. And people that are low in this trait are more feminized. Now, why is this? Well, because under our prehistoric environment, it would have been men who would have been hunting, who would have been building, who would have been solving these complex social problems, these complex cognitive problems that had to be solved, such that how you could survive. And so it would therefore make sense that men would be selected to be more systematic. It would also be men who would be fighting for the tribe and fighting for the group interests and whatever, and therefore would need to act lethally and kill in certain circumstances, and therefore it would make sense for men to be lower in empathy, to be less able to put themselves to understand the feelings of other people, so they could act lethally if necessary and fight and get to the top of the hierarchy. And if you look at the Yanomamo and other primitive tribes that are still around, this is exactly what you see, with high levels of brutality. Females, by contrast, there would be much less of a need to solve these complex problems, and much more of a need to be high in empathy, because you've got to be a good mother, and this means you've got to not lose your temper and get upset with the baby and whatever, and this means it's going to be better if you're very high in empathy, very good at putting yourself in the position of other people, imagining what their feelings are like. Women are often going to be part of these harems, because in these prehistoric societies there were polygamy and multiple marriage. They're going to have to get on with the other women in the harem, and therefore again it's going to pay to be socially skilled and to have high levels of empathy and understanding. The women also will want to get the investment of the men. They therefore will be good to be able to manipulate the men to get what they want, and therefore again it will be better to be high in empathy or whatever. And so therefore the women will tend to be higher in empathy and lower in systematizing. So what does this empathy mean? Well, empathy, the ability to put yourself in the position of somebody else, but also the ability to read social signals, to read the face, to understand external markers of internal states. That's empathy. Now, a second correlate of autism is hypersensitivity. Why are autistics hypersensitive? Well, they need to systematize. They want to systematize and understand the world, and the more information you can take in, the better able you are to systematize, and so to make sense of the situation, because the more information you take in, the more you can make sense of things. This makes autistics easily overstimulated. They can get easily overstimulated by noise, by smell, by touch, whatever. They're hypersensitive to their surroundings. Now, this can have a very bad side, because you can get the sort of autistic breakdown, sort of Rain Man, that they just can't cope with the situation because it's too overstimulated. And the third thing is, because they like systematizing, they like structure and they like order, and they can be very rigid. And again, they can get very, very upset if their structures and order and whatever, their systems are interfered with. If you've ever seen the film 40-Year-Old Virgin, he has this ordered, structured life where he collects toys and whatever and keeps them in pristine condition in their packets and so on. And eventually he gets this girlfriend. Well, actually she's a grandmother, but she's a young grandmother in her early 40s. And he gets this girlfriend, and she's trying to persuade him to sell his toys and get a lot of money out of it. And eventually he gets very upset with her, because this is his system, this is his order. Remember that for an autistic, the world is a world of chaos. There's all of this social stuff going on that he doesn't understand. There's all of these nuances going on that he doesn't understand. There's all of these arguments that happen with people when he offends people accidentally, because he's low in empathy and doesn't understand their feelings, and he lives in this world of chaos. And so for that reason as well, they will like to create their own structure, so that at least there is somewhere that is not chaos, at least there is somewhere that makes sense. And so this is another component of autism, that they will tend to be highly rule-bound, and also they will tend to have these obsessive interests. And so because they like structure and order, and they will tend to be really, really focused on their own interest. In that case, of course, it was collecting memorabilia and toys, or whatever it might happen to be. Now, this is what this means, of course, is that they have a very, very serious problems with these kinds of social situations, because they will be incredibly naive. They will wander into areas where they will be fearless. In fact, there was quite good evidence. There was a study called Power and Autistic Traits that was published in Frontiers in Psychology, and it showed that it analysed the biographies of various people who were quite senior people, who were prime ministers and whatever, and it showed that those people often seem to have autistic traits. The autistic traits seem to help them to attain positions of power. Now, on the one hand, you would think it would be a problem to attain positions of power if you were autistic, because part of attaining positions of power is being highly socially skilled and being able to get on with people and being able to play the game. But on the other hand, as people get older, if they are autistic, they will be systematizing other people's minds. So they will get better. They will become less naive. They will become less socially clumsy as they age, because they will logically, rather than instinctively, be able to work out how other people think. And of course, if they're low in empathy, if they're low in care, if they're low in being concerned about the feelings of others, then this will allow them to manipulate other people like they are chess pieces. And so consequently, they will, in a very systematic way, be able to rise up the social hierarchy. So this makes sense. The paper notes that people that are autistic are socially insensitive, they are aloof, they are very, very into abstract thinking, they are very, very into rules, and they will judge people according to their as moral or immoral according to their obedience of rules, rather than according to their empathy or anything like that. They are very into problem solving, and playing the political game is a kind of problem solving. And therefore, he argues it makes sense that people that are and they are low in empathy, which can can make them potentially ruthless in a way, because they don't really have this concern about the feelings of others. And so you can see how people that have some autistic traits will attain a political power. Margaret Thatcher, I would suggest, probably had certain autistic traits, which a certain sort of autism. Enoch Powell, definitely. If you read Richard Lynn's new autobiography, Memoirs of a Dissident Psychologist, he met Enoch Powell, and it's quite clear that Enoch Powell was very high in autism. And so it is quite possible for people that for very high in autism as well. They can seem highly intelligent. And highly focused on certain on the truth and on certain monumental values, which can inspire people, and they can sort of inspire people towards a desire for some greater world or whatever that they would like, because they are really focused on the truth and they will want this truth-based world, and that can be inspiring. And so you can see how people can reach positions of power. But unfortunately, they can, as this book, an autistic guy's guide to security, points out, they can also have tremendous problems. Which he lists many of these: false arrest, victims of all kinds of problems, because they are basically too honest. And this is the fundamental thing, that if you are autistic, you are focused on systematizing, you are focused on the truth, and therefore what is important to you is the truth, and this makes you honest. You will be inclined to be too honest, and you will get yourself into trouble. If you look at the current situation of what we call cancel culture or mobbing, often what this is about is people being too honest, people stating the empirical truth in an environment in which you're not meant to state the empirical truth. This is an increasingly religious environment in which there are certain doctrines. Those doctrines are counterfactual. Those doctrines are literally empirically untrue, but you signal your deference to the group, your adherence to the group, by adopting those doctrines and saying, yes, I believe in those doctrines, even though they're untrue. So you engage in an act of intellectual submission, rather like saying, I believe in the Trinity. Well, the Trinity is logically contradictory. And so therefore, as Tertullian said, I believe it because it's absurd. It's absurd, and therefore I believe it. And by believing it, I am showing my adherence. I'm signalling my adherence to the group. And this is the kind. And so they will. On the one hand, someone like Tertullian would assert, yes, I believe in truth. Oh, yes, the world is. It's God's revelation, and we must understand God's revelation, and to lie is blasphemy, and we must all tell the truth, and the Bible is quite clear that God, I am the way, the truth, and the light, and the devil is the father of lies, and we must all tell the truth. But on the other hand, I believe in the Trinity, and I believe it because it's absurd. And this is the kind of dishonesty that is absolutely incomprehensible to the high-functioning autistic, because people who are not autistics are liars. I want to make this absolutely clear. People who are not autistics are liars. And you can say what you like about my old friend Alex Waddle. Alex Waddle was lacking in social skill. Alex Waddle was naive. Alex Waddle was peculiar. Alex Waddle was eccentric. Alex Waddle could be extremely offensive. On one occasion, for example, he informed. It is one of the things that we used to do at Durham University. I'm ashamed to say, is we used to mock the locals, the locals, the Geordies. We would mock them as being, a bit below us, sort of uneducated, stupid. And we were once in walking through Durham, and there were a group of these local yobs, and he just informed them that all Geordies are stupid. The result of that was that we had to retreat into my flat, where is my ground floor flat, while these Geordies threw stones at the window. And he made matters worse by opening the window and saying, look, if you look at the data on this, it's a simple fact that people that are at university are more intelligent than people that don't go to university. And so they threw stones at the window. Now, what this betokened, on the one hand, it wasn't being nasty. He wasn't being nasty. He was being, in a weird way, just honest. But what this betokened was his honesty, his naivety, his high-functioning autistic traits, but he was a person you could trust. He was a person that wouldn't lie. He would never lie, and he was simply utterly interested in the truth. But he'd do these incredibly naive things. For example, there was a culture of drugs and whatever, and so he used to go and get drugs from Stockton, which is a way away from Durham, and sell them in Durham, because in Durham the cannabis and whatever was extremely expensive. Now, normally a person that sells drugs is going to be, well-hard mate. They're going to be a big tough person, and they're going to be very, very socially aware, because if the police find your stash, you're in serious trouble. As I understand it, the police never found his stash, and he never got into any physical trouble over this. Why? Well, he was fearless. He was utterly fearless, because he couldn't read the social signs. And by the way, it wasn't him being dishonest selling drugs. This was he genuinely believed, as a sort of philosophical belief that he had reasoned out, that it was acceptable to use cannabis, and therefore cannabis shouldn't be illegal, and the law was an ass. The law was wrong. So this is the kind of thing that you're dealing with. Equally, people who will break these social rules, will break these social conventions, and in the current age will be more likely to be mobbed. They will be more likely to be part of a media storm. And when they are part of a media storm, they won't know how to react. They will be trusting of the journalists. They won't realise, they will be too naive to understand that the journalists are not reasonable people, are not unbiased actors. The journalists are going to be biased and ideologically motivated, and are going to try and present them in the worst possible light, and are going to write a completely unfair and nasty and unreasonable article that's one-sided. They won't understand that, and so often they will give interviews to these people and whatever, and it will simply make the situation even worse. And this is one of the pieces. Well, this is given. Vox Day has done a book on this, where he gives advice on how to deal with being mobbed. And again, it is a person who is autistic who'll be more likely to be mobbed, because he'll say the wrong thing, and then he will react wrongly when he is mobbed. But this lack of coherence is something that is impossible for an autistic to understand and get their head around. If I give you an example, recently I was talking to a very, very left-wing Finnish person, a Finnish person who was overtly likely to say, oh yeah, I vote for vasemmisteliitto, or whatever, I vote for the left, I'm in favour of equality, all this kind of stuff, all this kind of woke stuff that is imbibed by moderately intelligent people who realise that they can get along by imbibing the dominant ideology and pretending they believe it and convincing themselves they believe it. And this is what this person had done. But then this person then started talking about how they hate the fact that the Finnish language is being polluted by foreign words. They hate the fact that the English language is polluting Finnish, and why can't we keep Finnish pure, and why can't we keep Finnish Finnish? And they don't like the fact that Finnish culture is changing such that it's influenced all the time by Englishness. And I said, well, for God's sake, can't you see the contradiction between saying that you're in favour of equality, you're basically against nationalism, you regard all nationalism as racist and bad, but yet at the same time you're a Finnish nationalist. You have this conception of Finnishness and of the Finnish language as sort of pure and crystalline and sort of a fossilised thing that shouldn't be touched. And surely, if all people are equal, all peoples are equal, all languages are equal, why should you want to preserve Finnish in this pure historical form that relates to an ethnocentric state? Shouldn't you want Finnish to evolve and to accept foreign influences? So you're in favour of foreign influences. And that person said, oh, well, yeah, but it's not a matter of race, though. I said, well, maybe it's not a matter of race, but you're saying that you're against foreign influences on the Finnish language. Isn't that completely inconsistent with your politics, which says that you're in favour of foreign influences on Finland, and you're not in favour of nationalism, but you're in favour of this? It's a contradiction. To which this person eventually had to admit that it was a contradiction, that what they were advocating was an element of Finnish nationalism, but that maybe they were doing this to try and get on with me, to try and bond with me, because they thought that I was sort of right-wing or whatever. And maybe I should have understood that that's what was going on. And I said, what are you talking about? What you're talking about is a completely unsystematic, illogical way of seeing the world. I'd have a lot more respect for you if you were simply an extreme leftist than if you were an extreme leftist with a contradictory worldview. But the problem is with most of these normies, they are liars. And they're perfectly happy. They lie even to themselves. And they're perfectly happy to have contradictory worldviews. They don't care that their worldview is contradictory. They're high in empathy, low in systematizing, even system blind. They don't care about systems. They will happily have a completely contradictory worldview as long as it makes them feel good and makes them feel they are a good person and makes them feel socially accepted and makes them feel that others will accept them at any given time. They are chameleons. As the poem by Flanders and Swan said, consider the chameleon, he colours everything, himself and his opinions, by the company he is in. And they genuinely do this. They genuinely will alter how they even perceive the world and how, with regard to who they're with, to some extent, in order to get on with them. And if you can lie to yourself, then you can be more convincing in that view. And therefore their views will change. Their views will alter. They will think, yeah, this is how I see the world at this point in time. And then maybe there's some other people, or maybe this is how I see the world. And there's no consistency to them. There's no systematic consistency to them at all. It's just a hodgepodge of different things that allow them to get on socially at any given time. And so you are dealing with liars. And at least with Alex Dreher, he wasn't a liar. Though what did happen, ultimately, was that he started to have sexual confusion. He came to the conclusion, in his view, logically, that he was actually a female. He had a sex change, and he started calling himself Dreher. And then he went and trained to be a masseuse in Thailand. And then he came back, having done a master's degree in politics and philosophy. And then he came back to England, went to Brighton, and worked as a prostitute in Brighton. Now, what a naive thing to do. What a dangerous world to get yourself into. What a naive thing to do. Worse than that, he worked from home. So these people were actually coming to his home, or her home. And then worse than that, he kept huge amounts of cash in the house. Scores of thousands of pounds just in the house. And then worse than that, he approached the tax authorities and asked how she could pay tax on, I know him as he could pay tax on his income. And then eventually one day, he was having sex with a client who was a Sky TV fitter in his early 40s. And from what seems to have happened is that he told that client he used to be a man. And I can imagine the client saying to him, oh, you've got very, very perfect breasts, or something like that. And Alex saying, oh, well, yes, they would be perfect because actually I was born a man. And so obviously they were very, very realistic and high standard. And the person completely lost his temper, saw red, and strangled him, and then set fire to the flat. And that is the kind of situation that only an autistic, surely, could get themselves into. And that is why we all need, those people who are slightly high in Asperger's traits need a better understanding of their security. Well, I hope this is a bit of interest, and if it has, then feel free to help fund the show, which you can do below in the links below. I live stream on Tuesdays and Mondays and Fridays, Mondays and Thursdays. Mondays and Thursdays at 7 p.m. UK time, and I will see you soon, and goodbye!